Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Let's just give it a couple minutes for the room to populate, and we'll jump on this in about 2 minutes. So, thank you. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll just give about another minute or so before we start. All right, well, maybe we should get going. I know everyone's really busy. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Chris Steinkamp, the Director of Advocacy for SIA. Thank you again for joining us for this discussion about the US trade war and the tariffs. Since the tariffs were announced in 2018, SIA has been staying abreast of the situation and helping our members navigate the best path forward for our businesses. We've also been helping elevating the voice of our industry in Washington to help lawmakers better understand the impacts of the tariffs and to drive policy change. That said, we're part of an amazingly impactful coalition called Americans for Free Trade that has been working tirelessly on behalf of all of us. And it's a coalition of hundreds of associations that represent businesses that are impacted by the tariffs. Americans for Free Trade are truly on the front lines of the US-China tariffs, and they've been keeping us updated literally on a daily basis with critical information, and have been giving us opportunities to engage. And we're happy to have them here today to talk about the situation, some mitigation strategies, and how we can all engage as business leaders to make an impact on the tariffs. So I want to introduce our speakers. First, we have Jonathan Gold, who's the Vice President of Supply Chain and Customs Policy at the National Retail Federation. Secondly, we have Brian Kuehl, the founder and co-director of Farmers for Free Trade, and Matt Terrill, the partner at Firehouse Strategies. So before I hand this off to John, I just want to remind everyone that we'll have a Q&A session at the end of the discussion before we wrap within the hour. And if you have any questions, please jot them down in the Q&A toolbar, which you'll find right along the bottom of your screen. And we'll see it and we'll answer as many questions as we can. So the session is going to also be recorded, and you'll get a link to the recording very shortly after we wrap. So thanks again. Let me hand this over to John Gold, and we'll get started.
Great, thanks, Chris. Good afternoon. I want to thank Chris for the opportunity to participate in this afternoon's webinar. Again, my name is Jonathan Gold, and I'm the Vice President for Supply Chain and Customs Policy with the National Retail Federation. For over the past almost 2 years, I've had the pleasure of serving as one of the organizers and spokespeople for Americans for Free Trade. We wanted to use this opportunity to provide an update for SIA members on the ongoing trade war, talk about the efforts of the Americans for Free Trade Coalition and the Tariffs at the Heartland campaign, and discuss how you can engage to help that effort. Let me give a little background to start on the coalition. As you can imagine, NRF and our members were very concerned as the initial 301 investigations began in 2017. We certainly agree with the concerns from USTR regarding international intellectual property theft and forced technology transfers, and the report that was published in early 2018. Our main concern, though, stems from the use of tariffs as a solution from the start. While the initial tariff list was $50 billion worth of trade, which was then split into List 1 and List 2, the trade fight quickly escalated as China retaliated, and then we had a back and forth retaliation, which has now resulted in an additional $500 billion worth of Chinese goods being subject to additional tariffs, and obviously US goods that have tariffs placed on them in retaliation as well. Early on, NRF convened interested associations as a means to share intelligence and coordinate efforts. We did this initially on an ad hoc basis. As the trade war expanded, we felt it was important to actually create a formalized coalition to continue to work on this effort. This is something that we do in Washington, D.C. Quite a bit. When there's a lot of groups that are interested in an issue, we form these coalitions. These are always better maintained and allow us to help tell the message and tell the story. So with that, we officially launched Americans for Free Trade in October of 2018. The main purpose of the coalition has been to tell the story of the negative impact that tariffs have had on all sectors of the U.S. economy: retailers, manufacturers, service suppliers, importers, exporters, agriculture interests, and others, as well as their workers and consumers. Our coalition has grown to over 250 trade associations and companies over the past 2 years. We know that one of the biggest challenges throughout the trade war has been the uncertainty surrounding the tariffs. The back and forth over when or if they will increase has been problematic for any company who's been trying to do long-term planning. So where do we stand now? According to our most recent tariff tracker, Americans have paid an additional $57 billion in tariffs since the trade war began. Not China, it's U.S. interests that have paid that money. As we all know, tariffs are taxes, and they're paid by the U.S. importer. Lists 1 through 4 are currently in place, with tariffs on lists 1 through 3 set at 25% and list 4A at 7.5%. The tariffs were going to increase last year, but we're maintained at the current levels since the negotiations on the Phase 1 trade deal were progressing. The U.S. and China agreed on the Phase 1 trade deal in January 2020, which then took effect in February of 2020. They took effect on Valentine's Day, which I guess was a Valentine's Day present for everybody. USTR did implement an exclusion process thanks to strong calls from business community as well as several congressional leaders. USTR continues to provide a number of product exclusions, which were good for about a year, and has issued some extensions for exclusions that have been granted. Unfortunately, those extensions were only granted until the end of this year. They were not given a full year. In some cases, they were given 6 months. And we know that the most recent exclusions that were granted were given within a day or 2 days, and companies had 2 weeks to try and file for an exclusion of the extension. So we know there are ongoing concerns with the exclusion process as a whole. It's a non-transparent process. There's no rhyme or reason as to why certain HTS lines are granted an exclusion or others are not, or as to how some exclusions are granted extensions and others are not. This continues to be an ongoing issue that many in the business community and many members of Congress have continued to raise with USTR. When questioned during hearings before both the House Ways and Means and Senate Finance Committee about the exclusion process and extensions beyond the end of the year, Ambassador Lighthizer basically said that companies have had almost 2 years to figure out how to move their supply chains. It's unclear what will happen with the exclusion process at the end of this year. Obviously, there are a lot of other issues affecting the U.S.-China relationship right now. U.S. and Chinese negotiators were set to meet virtually last week to do a 6-month review of the Phase 1 deal. There have been mixed messages from the administration officials about the progress of the deal. Unfortunately, the meeting was canceled late last week, with President Trump saying just the other day that he canceled the meeting because he doesn't feel like talking to China right now. It's unclear when the meeting will be rescheduled or what that means for the Phase 1 trade deal. White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney has said there won't be a rescheduling of the negotiation or the discussion, but yet the Chinese, as of today, have said they are going to meet sometime in the next few days to talk about the agreement. So again, a lot of uncertainty and lack of clarity on exactly what's happening with the Phase 1 deal. Obviously, as we enter the final months of the campaign, China will continue to be front and center throughout the election season. President Trump will continue to show what he should try to show that he's being tough on China, despite the negative impact of the tariffs, especially as companies try to recover from the coronavirus pandemic. Vice President Biden has been critical about the trade war and the negative impact it has had on businesses and farmers, but yet he still has to show that he is tough on China as well. Our goal throughout this effort has been to tell the story of U.S. businesses who have been hurt by the trade war and the tariffs. Our end goal has been to get a final agreement that removes all of the tariffs. With that as a kind of a background, let me go and turn to Brian Kuehl, who's a co-director of Farmers for Free Trade and helps manage the overall Tariffs for the Heartland campaign, to talk a little bit more about some of our grassroots efforts. And the roundtable is that actually SIA has participated in. After Brian, Matt Terrill from Firehouse Strategies will talk about some of our grass tops and communications efforts. After that, we're happy to take questions about any aspect of the trade war or any effort of the campaign. But I think part of the goal today is to try and talk to you about the effort, and would love to get additional support from SIA members. We're grateful for the support that SIA has given overall as the association, but we need to hear from additional companies to help to tell that story. So with that, Brian, let me go and turn it over to you.
Thank you, John, and thanks to the Snowsports Industries Association for hosting this webinar and for their support and engagement in the Tariffs Hurt the Heartland campaign. So as John said, my name is Brian Kuehl. I'm co-executive director of Farmers for Free Trade. And, you know, I think it's important to talk about why Farmers for Free Trade is here on this webinar. All of us obviously love snow sports and skiing, so that's part of the reason. But I think more than that, farmers are the most compelling spokespeople in American politics. They carry, in a lot of respects, the biggest stick, certainly a disproportionately large stick, given their numbers. And Farmers for Free Trade was formed with the recognition that engaging that constituency was going to be a critical part of the strategy necessary to push back on trade wars and create more stable trade. So Farmers for Free Trade is a broad national coalition of agricultural organizations, agribusinesses, individual farmers and ranchers. We host events around the United States, and critically, we partner with Americans for Free Trade on the combined Tariffs for the Heartland campaign. The Tariffs for the Heartland campaign really is unlike any other campaign in the space. I think we can say without pride or lack of modesty that this is the tip of the spear on trade and tariff issues in the United States. The combined Tariffs for the Heartland campaign, bringing together farmers, retailers, manufacturers, service industries, and all affiliated businesses. Hundreds and hundreds of associations and businesses under one roof, all pushing in the same direction. And I think that the campaign that this coalition has run has really been remarkable. Over the last 2 years, we've put on dozens and dozens of town hall events around the United States. Many of those were in person pre-COVID. We'd hold them at distilleries. We'd hold them at crib manufacturing facilities. Anywhere we could gather people together, we would hold a town hall. We focused those really strategically on important political states, battleground states where we knew we could get the most attention. So we really played aggressively in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Ohio, in North Carolina, in Florida, Arizona, in all the states you hear about as the key battleground states. Can you hear me? Everyone's still good? Good. All right.
Hey, Brian, there's quite a bit of static. I don't know if it's your microphone, but there is a bunch of static.
All right. Well, let me try switching over to. Bear with me 1 second. We'll see if we can.
That actually sounds okay now. I don't know what you did.
Better?
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's try this. I'll lean forward a little bit, and if it does sound like it's getting staticky, please give me a high sign, and I'll try to switch over to a different speakerphone. We've held dozens of town hall events in key battleground states. Since COVID, we've taken those virtual. We've been holding virtual town hall events, which are really great opportunities for the diverse array of businesses impacted by this trade war to come together and tell their stories. Again, manufacturers, retailers, farmers, talking with one voice about the impact that the trade wars had on them. I think the one message I want to really leave with everyone from this town hall event is what an incredibly important moment this is in terms of this issue. We're 2.5 months away from an election. We know that trade is going to be a central topic throughout the next 2.5 months. We need to be resourced, and we need to be moving aggressively to shape and influence that discussion. This is not the time to be quiet. This is the time to be very loud. It's also important when you think about the prospect of a Biden victory and President Biden stepping into the White House and confronting the question, what do I do with this trade war? How do I respond to these tariffs? And do I repeal the tariffs? Do I leave them in place? So I really feel like we're shaping that message right now, and it's a critically important time. So I think thank you to all of you who are engaged. If you aren't currently engaged in the campaign, either supporting it financially or engaged in terms of helping tell your story, we really want to work with you. We've had great success working with folks from the Snowsports Industries Association at your convention 2 years ago, but we'd like to fire that up in a virtual way, given that it's COVID, and really engage with you over the next 2 months. So thank you for the opportunity to talk today, and I'll pass it on to Matt Terrill to talk a little bit about our communications and Grasstop's efforts.
Great. Thanks, Brian. And it's great to be with everyone on this call. We've had here at Firehouse Strategies really the great opportunity to work with John Gold of AFT and Brian, again, with Farmers for Free Trade on a coordinated campaign that has been focused over the past few months on really driving our messaging forward and really driving it towards the president and highlighting for the president how this trade war is not only bad policy, but bad politics. We've really worked to focus in on correlating how the trade war impacts what the president cares about the most, and that's his reelection campaign. And we've done that over the past few months by implementing a strategic targeted media campaign, particularly focused, as Brian mentioned, on key battleground states like Wisconsin and Ohio and Florida, among other key battleground states, highlighting how the president's trade war is not playing well in the key battlegrounds that the president has to win in order to win re-election come November. We've done that not only through strategic media, earned media, getting stories pitched and placed in both national and state-based media outlets, but getting op-eds and letters to the editor penned by influencers who actually have the ear and trust of the president and his team. That's included getting state party chairs and party leaders and activists at all levels, former Trump campaign staffers from his inner orbit from his 2016 campaign, who still have his ear and trust in this campaign to speak both with him and his senior campaign team directly in support of our messaging, highlighting how this trade war is just not playing well among the general electorate. And so far, those efforts directed towards President Trump at times have taken some time to break through, but are breaking through. We've just seen a few days ago and weeks ago, news stories highlighting how senior campaign officials, many officials who our team in coordination with Brian and John were able to intercept to encourage them to put pressure on President Trump in support of our messaging. News stories have highlighted how those folks have gone directly to the president and encourage him to roll back his position on tariffs and trade, highlighting how the trade war is going to have a negative impact on the president's reelection. But as Brian accurately pointed out, as we get closer and closer to November, Joe Biden may very well win this race. And so really focusing our attention as well on Joe Biden. And as we've seen over the past few days and weeks, multiple news articles and stories are coming out highlighting how Joe Biden is feeling the pressure to be much tougher on China. We're going to see the Trump campaign push on Joe Biden to be tougher on China, highlighting how Joe Biden is, quote unquote, weak on China, to use the president's terms. So really a big chunk of this campaign going forward is not only keeping the pressure on President Trump, but also keeping the pressure on Joe Biden to continue to move him in the right direction, our direction, with respect to the trade war. And just as we've done through our influencer map in terms of President Trump and his campaign, we're doing the same for Joe Biden. Sometimes the best way to get to Joe Biden isn't to directly go to Joe Biden, is to go to his sister Valerie, who has played a senior role in all of his campaigns in the past, including this presidential campaign. It's going to former Senator Chris Dodd, who has played an instrumental role in being in Joe Biden's orbit throughout this campaign. It's really going to the right folks who have the ear of Joe Biden and his senior team, and encouraging them really to get Joe Biden on the record now during this campaign before November in support of our messaging. Whether it's President Trump or Joe Biden, now is the time with this election taking place when they're actually listening to influencers and listening to voters. We'll hopefully be able to make further progress and get both of these individuals to move in the right direction. And finally, another big element of what we've been working on and are continuing to work on in this campaign is really laying the framework and foundation for congressional success. In terms of our Hill policy efforts that AFT and Brian have been engaged in, among other members of the team, it's really giving them the tools and resources to help put pressure on key members of Congress and key congressional leadership who may be in power come January. So really it's that coordinated campaign, our authentic, organic approach to all of this that is really seeing some light and starting to pay off. And as we've mentioned, now is the time more than ever to keep the pressure on President Trump, keep moving the needle with Joe Biden, and maintain our Hill policy support as we head into November and beyond. And happy to take any questions from you all at this time.
Hey, Matt, there's a question that just came in from Dave. It says, we're all optimistic that Biden wins, but what is the contingency plan in the event Republicans hold steady in the White House? Should that happen, do you see Trump taking a stronger position or compromising?
With this president, he can change his mind on anything, as we've seen. An example of that can be seen with the masks. 1 minute, President Trump is telling us as a nation not to wear masks. Next minute, he's wearing a mask. It's an analogy, it's an example, but it's an example of how this president can really change his tune on policies, any policy. So with regard to the question, which I think is a really good question, right now what we need to be focused on is putting pressure on President Trump now, because this is the best time we can actually get his ear and get him to move in terms of policy. This president, like most politicians, let's be honest, make decisions typically around elections and based on what will help them in the upcoming election. So the best way to ensure macro success, if in fact President Trump wins this race, is to continue to keep the pressure on him now, really highlighting how voters now care deeply about our position, are in support of our position. And down the road, the president wants to have an agenda in a second term, i.e. keeping control of Congress or picking up control in Congress 2 years from now. He really needs to get right on this issue of tariffs and trade. So right now, it's keeping that pressure to get him on the record, to get him on the right side of this. And I think that's a great question, and hopefully that answers it.
Matt, I think part of that too is, we've done a lot of work with members of Congress and obviously with a lot of Republican members who traditionally would have been opposed to the Trump tariffs. But they want to give the president some space to work through these issues. And I think now we're at an inflection point 2 years in that shows the tariffs have not worked. So we've kind of gotten away from your traditional Republican orthodoxy that I think these members really need to take a hard look at themselves in the mirror and say, is this how we want to continue? The numbers are in about the negative impact the tariffs have had overall, especially on our exporters and our farmers who've been getting crushed as a result of this. So, I think there's gonna be a lot of soul searching going forwards if, President Trump does, succeed in his second term about where we go on trade policy as a whole. And I think part of that too is gonna be a lot of our trading partners, are a little gun shy on actually working with the U.S. And is that going to continue under a second term of the Trump presidency? But this is why it's so important to have, individual companies telling their story, especially to members of Congress, and talk about the impact it has, on you as a constituent, the jobs that you support, the community that you support, and overall. So this is where it's really important to tell that story from a personal perspective. One of the things that we continued to fight on was the issue of duty deferral. And, during COVID, can we find a way to, defer some of the duties, which are taxes, to give companies some leeway to help themselves recover? And obviously there was a lot of pushback on that, and there continues to be pushback on that. But this is where you've got to tell your story and say, if I didn't have to pay these duties, if I didn't have to pay these millions of dollars in extra taxes, here's how I would use that money. Hire more employees, do some reinvestment, do investment in the store, use that money to pay for the additional protections I've got to put in place now as a result of COVID. So I think there's a lot of room to tell the story and try and get at least Congress back on board with, how trade should be working. And oh, by the way, Congress needs to take control once again of trade policy, especially when it comes to issues like tariffs.
And that's a great point, just to chime in here real quick, that John brought up about putting the personal face and narrative on this trade war. To John's point, working with John and Brian on getting business owners who are part of the coalition, business leaders nationwide, and tell their stories about how this trade war has had a negative impact on their businesses, on their jobs, on their employees. That's been really a big part of our campaign and keeping it authentic and organic as it should be. Our team has helped get those folks booked on everything from CNBC to local press, really serving as great vehicles to demonstrate the real impact of this trade war on real lives.
And there's a way to do this without being political. I know there's a lot of concern from folks about wanting to, seem like they're against the president. But there's a way to, tell that real story and talk about, look, we agree China's a bad actor, but there are better ways to go about getting to a solution here as opposed to shooting ourselves in the foot with these additional tariffs that, again, are paid by U.S. companies and passed along to U.S. consumers. So let's find, a way that actually we can work with our trading partners because they all share the same concerns over IPR theft and forced tech transfer and other issues that are going on in China. But, we continue to shoot ourselves in the foot working with our trade partners as we get into things like the, continued trade war on steel and aluminum. We just put aluminum tariffs back on on Canada, which certainly is going to impact USMCA, which just went into effect. Not the best way to start out that new free trade agreement. But there are other ways that we can and should be going about bringing about change in China. So I think we've got to figure out what those pathways are. And I think a lot of folks have a lot of good ideas on how to do that. But, tariffs should never be the first line of defense when we come to these trade wars. It should always be kind of the last bullet in the chamber, because we know the negative impact that tariffs have. There's a long history of using tariffs in trade wars, and it's never worked. And they're not working now.
Hey, Matt, what are some opportunities that SIA members can have in terms of that kind of outreach? Obviously, it's our responsibility to provide our members with these opportunities, but can you kind of go through some like the menu of options that we might have?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, our team, if you come on board and have the opportunity to work with us, and our team will provide a whole host of different platforms to do that members are comfortable with. So in some cases, members are comfortable going on background or maybe telling their story that's not too public with a reporter or a media outlet. We're happy to do that if you would like to be behind the scenes and doing that, but getting your message out. If you want to be front and center and have your personal narrative and face on it, great, we'll do that. We've done that by booking, as I mentioned, members on national media outlets, national TV, talk radio, but local outlets as well that may be in your individual city or state. So you can really put your personal footprint on the messaging in an authentic manner. And on top of that, social media is obviously key as well. We've really worked with members to push out coordinated messaging on Twitter and Facebook and other key social media platforms to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of messaging and pushing that out in an organic manner as well. So whether it's traditional media or social media or other platforms in between, we really want to work with folks in the best way possible they're comfortable with to get their voice and message out there on this trade war.
I think the other thing I would add to that is the importance of broadening this network. So we can work directly with your companies in the way that Matt just laid out. We can also work with your employees. We can work with your suppliers. We can work with other colleagues that you have in the industry, whether they're SIA members or not. What's important is that we're building as big a tent and as big a campaign as we can. And so we have a lot of different ways we've done that in the past. I mentioned 2 years ago, many of you may have met Angela Hoffman with Farmers for Free Trade and Tariffs for the Heartland at the SIA conference, I believe in Colorado. We generated a whole lot of letters out of that conference using our phone to action platform. Easy tools to use to just build attention on Capitol Hill. And again, happy to do that with your employees. Engaging us with your colleagues or others in the industry, with your suppliers or your vendors, to the extent that it's hurting a whole supply chain, this trade war, help us figure out who else should be engaged. We'll talk to them, we'll engage them in the campaign. We need to build as big a groundswell as we can.
Chris, I think the other thing too is, participating in things like the roundtables that we talked about. We just hosted one with congressional staff a couple of weeks ago that Gail Ross from Crimson Clover participated in, and she did a fantastic job talking about the impact of the tariffs. And, it was a kind of cross-sectoral panel that we had with six, I think it was 6 folks, ag, manufacturing, apparel, and just, again, everybody's telling that same story. And I think the biggest issue here is getting that story heard. I think there's a lot of misconceptions with a lot of folks about how supply chains actually work. Folks think it's easy to shift your supply chain out of China, and we all know that that's not the case. But you've got to make that story known. Tell folks about the difficulties that takes. As much as you would like to shift your supply chain, you might not be able to. You might not have the resources to. There's a capacity issue in other countries. As we've heard from many of our folks, there's no new China. There's no other country out there that can pick up the slack that China currently has. Obviously, a lot of companies have moved. They've shifted their supply chains, but you can't shift everything. And being able to tell that story and how important that is. Not everything's going to rush back to the United States. I just don't think that's a reality. And I think we've got to make sure folks fully understand that, and only companies can tell that story. So folks are willing to tell that story. But I think tied to that as well, again, it's all about the jobs. It's all about the U.S. jobs that are dependent upon the trade relationship with China that folks might not consider. They look and see that a product is made in China and not understand all the different aspects of the U.S. value chain that are part of the making of that product. While the product might not be actually sewn together in the U.S., all the design and sourcing and customs and transportation and all the other pieces of this are all done here in the United States. It's that final piece that's done somewhere else overseas that, let's be honest, a lot of folks aren't willing to do here in the United States anymore.
Mm-hmm. And I think we can't underestimate how powerful the corporate voice is on this issue. Writing letters, making phone calls, jumping on the media and writing op-eds. It is really, really powerful. And I think our industry has such a unique perspective on this because of, we have multi-billion-dollar companies and small retailers, and each one of those stories is very different. And taking advantage of some of these outreach opportunities can really move the issue forward. And I hope our members will do that. And we'll do a good job of serving up these opportunities to all of our members, because it really does need to happen. Alex has a good question. Do you have any insights into specific threats of new or continued tariff rules affecting Snowsports hard goods specifically? Oh, and then also any specifics related to potential re-engagement of TTP and the status of possible US-UK agreement?
I'll start a couple of things there. Unclear on, future flare-ups with China. Obviously, the president is going to continue to want to look strong. We've obviously seen a couple of different executive orders on things like TikTok and WeChat, which I know my members are extremely concerned about, especially those that have operations in China. And we keep hearing that there are going to be more executive orders coming, especially as the president wants to look tough on China and continues to blame China for the coronavirus. Unclear what those are going to be. There potentially are more sanctions that are going to come out, especially over the Hong Kong situation, as we see as well on things like forced labor. The issue of Xinjiang has been in the news quite a bit, and apparel as a whole and cotton products are getting caught up in that. So we can certainly see some actions on that, not related to tariffs, but just in general sanctions from that. Re-engagement in the TPP or the CTPPP, I forget what we're calling it these days. Under a Trump administration, no, there will not be any kind of re-engagement in that. I think President Trump has made it very clear he does not like multilateral organizations, multilateral trade agreements. He wants to do one-on-one. I think we were lucky to keep USMCA or NAFTA, USMCA intact as an agreement between three countries. There was some talk early on about splitting it off and just doing a US-Canada, US-Mexico, which we already had, but unclear that's going to happen. I think with a President Biden, there might be more of a willingness to re-examine doing a multilateral free trade agreement and potentially rejoining the CTPPP. But to be honest, I think we've lost a lot of our negotiating advantage by pulling out and letting those countries kind of go it alone. It's going to be very difficult for us to kind of come in and say, it's got to be this way or we don't join. So I think it's going to be a very big challenge going forwards. As far as the US-UK FTA, the negotiations are scheduled to pick up again. I doubt you'll see anything finalized in the next couple of months before the end of the year. I think we all recognize how difficult free trade agreements are to negotiate, especially new ones. But that could, potentially see something, next year. If you do have an administration transition, though, I mean, that's going to, take some time to figure that out and figure out what the new priorities are going to be going forward. So lots of good questions, and I wish I had a crystal ball to know how all this would play out, but it's, a lot of uncertainty going forwards, which we know is extremely difficult for companies, especially as you try and do your long-term planning and really understand how you're going to do your business. And especially now in the situation a lot of companies are in, trying to just recover from, the impact from COVID and how to continue to go forwards.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, Brian or Matt, anything else you guys wanted to add to that?
I think it's a good response. I guess the only thing I would add on TPP, I think there is a scenario where Biden wants to repudiate Trump's approach, and multilateral engagement on China is a big repudiation of Trump's approach. So I think there could be pressure to try to pull together and get into the CTPPP. The other piece is, for Trump, if he's reelected, I think there will be huge pressure to show that he actually can deliver. I mean, he hasn't delivered to speak of yet. He's got the phase one with Japan. He's got the phase one with China. He's got South Korea, none of which are really earth-shattering. USMCA, not really earth-shattering. So I could believe while we wouldn't get into the TPP, we would see a lot of pressure to do a phase two Japan, to do Indonesia, or to do Vietnam. I think there'll be pressure to get bilats with many of the TPP countries.
There's another question. It says, well, we're likely to aspire to remain apolitical. Should there be a consideration to endorse Biden so that we can elevate this to a public dialogue or even a campaign promise?
As far as the coalition goes, we are not.
Right.
We will not be endorsing a presidential candidate. I mean, even through NRF, we don't endorse presidential candidates, which is not something that we do. But I think, continuing to raise the issue and get it into the dialogue, I mean, we are continuing to try and do that. We've done that. Firehouse has been successful in some of the briefings that President Trump has given. We've been able to get questions planted with certain reporters to ask the president about the tariffs. His response has not been the greatest, as we've all seen. But we continue to push that. And I think, again, with these getting to the influencers to continue to get to both candidates is where we need to go to continue to push this and get the dialogue out there. And again, through things like op-eds, letters to the editors, and continuing the pressure on members of Congress when they're home doing their own town halls about issues. This is where we've got to raise that issue. Matt, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, not to be too redundant to my earlier points in the conversation here, but this is frankly the best, maybe only time really to do that type of pressure that John's talking about, whether it's the President of the United States or Vice President Biden or congressional leadership or congressional members at any level. They are most attuned to voters, constituents at this time. So in addition to working with you and other business leaders and members around the country to put their personal face and narrative from the business component of this, really churning and burning up energy from voters and constituents that these politicians and the president and Joe Biden will actually listen to is really the key. These next couple of weeks, the best opportunity to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting to know that, like, during an election year, the common theory is that everything is meant to be kind of quiet. But it seems as though this is a perfect time to start elevating our voice on this. And especially, our industry is a $76 billion industry. It's not small change. And if we can really get some voices out there to do this, I think it would make a big impact. Does anybody have any other questions? Feel free to type them in. See any more. John, did you have anything that you want to talk about with Americans for Free Trade or anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously as we've been talking about, I mean, the best way is to engage, and that's either to join the coalition, but more importantly, and I hate to say this, but help contribute financially to the coalition. We've had a small number of companies and associations that have helped to fund the effort, but as we're in our critical time now, we need more to be able to keep the effort going and continue to push. So. I believe, SIA, you guys have contributed financially to us, and we very much appreciate that. But, even small donations help the effort. So, happy to work with you and SIA members to join the effort. And then again, hopefully contribute financially too, so we can keep this effort up and keep it going. And, hate to end that on the financial asks. We know everybody's in, tough situation right now, but this is the time where, the best time for us to kind of really go at both campaigns and try and make a difference. And we can only do that if we have the financial wherewithal to make that happen.
John, I would just underscore your point. We've received in the last 2 months quite a number of $1,000, $2,000, $5,000 donations, which individually, you may think that's not a lot of money, and it's not, but it really adds up. And I think having any level of support, financial support, really can help this campaign maintain its tenor and volume that it needs to maintain right now. So, John, I think I would strongly support what you're saying and think it's the right note to end on. This is what's needed.
And you guys have been such a critical resource for us to keep on top of the situation and to give us opportunities for our members to speak out. So it's been incredibly beneficial to us. So thank you.
We appreciate the partnership, Chris.
Of course. Does anybody else have any questions? Feel free to type them in, or if anybody has any questions about mitigation strategies, any of the tariff specific questions.
And
Oh,
I would also say, Chris, and to everyone on the webinar, we're obviously happy to follow up one-on-one as well. If people have questions or want to follow up with individual points, happy to, that's part of what we do.
Thank you. There's one question, says, with major flooding happening in the Guangzhou region, many in the red zone, would there be more pressure on China to come to some sort of an agreement?
Unclear. I think part of it now is just the willingness of the president to actually want to sit down and negotiate with China, which he does not seem ready and wanting to do at this point. Again, I think he wants to continue to focus to be tough on China. It's still unclear what the end goal here is. Phase one didn't address the core issues that are at the heart of the 301 issue, the IPR and the forced tech transfer. That wasn't there. I mean, let's be honest. Phase one was mostly a purchasing agreement for a handful of commodities, and China's having difficulty in fulfilling those purchases right now, which I think Brian would have brought us back to pre-trade wars to what they would have been buying anyway.
If even that, I mean, we're below pre-trade war levels still.
So again, unclear what the end goal here with this whole trade war is. If you want to address the systemic issues on subsidies and IPR and forced tech transfer, there's a better way to go about doing this than just going it alone and using tariffs. There are trading partners that all share the same concerns that we need to be working with, whether through the WTO or not. I think there are better ways to achieve the end goal, which is to get change within China for the better.
Thank you. There's a question from Alex just asking, is there best recommendations on any resources that we can use to track concerns beyond the normal media outlets? Obviously, SIA will do our best to keep our members up to speed on what's going on, but are there any other outlets that you would recommend that our members stay on top of?
Just as part of our campaign, we provide, if folks join, we provide daily clips. So as a part of what we offer for all members is a daily clip service. It breaks down all the news on tariffs and trade, in particular to our messaging as well. And that's not just clips on activity that we're pushing out as a team, but additional news articles as well. So it's really a central place that provides everybody with the latest news and the ability to track in real time everything going on with respect to our messaging.
I think also on social media, obviously following both Tariffs at the Heartland campaign as well as Americans for Free Trade would be good resources as well. We tend to put out a lot of good information through those media as well.
Yeah, and I can say getting that email in my inbox pretty much every morning from you guys with the clips has been incredibly helpful. So that might be something for everyone to consider. I don't see any other questions. Just give another few seconds. All right, well, thank you all for taking time to join us today. And thank you, John and Brian and Matt, for everything and for spending time with us today. We really appreciate it. Again, this is going to be, has been recorded and it's going to be posted on our website. We'll send an email out later this afternoon or tomorrow with a link to it. But if you have any other questions or suggestions, please feel free to email us at advocacy@snowsports.org and we'll reply as quickly as we can. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. We will be in touch soon.
Thanks, guys.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.